Hi everyone, I'm Miranda and welcome to this month's Comfort Book Club discussion. I'm joined by my mum Donna today.
Hello.
And we're discussing October's Comfort Book Club choice, which is Persuasion by Jane Austen. If you're new to the Comfort Book Club, then do check out the link in the description box, which will explain it to you. But for all those returning Comfort Book Club members, welcome. And thank you so much to those of you who sent in a voice message to add to our discussion today. I've been so looking forward to this one.
Me too. I mean, it's our favourite Jane Austen, if not our favourite novel of all time, I guess.
Yes, I think so. Exactly. Real favourite. Yeah. And definitely a comfort read for both of us, especially in the autumn.
Oh, definitely.
And we've chosen an autumnal treat, which we thought was appropriate to have with our tea and cake as we discuss the book. We made an apple cake, a Dorset apple cake on the weekend, which was very appropriate as the book is partly set in Dorset, Lyme, of course.
Delicious. Indeed.
So do grab a cup of tea yourselves and get cozy for our discussion today. So one of the reasons that Persuasion is one of my favourite novels, and I think it's the same for you.
I think so. I know what you're going to say, I think.
It's because of Anne. Anne
Elliot.
Of Anne. Yes. She's my favourite heroine. I think she's just such a wonderful character. And it was lovely to hear from some other Comfort Book Club members, Heather and Penny, both from the USA, who also spoke about how much they love Anne. So let's hear from them, starting with Heather's message today.
Dear Miranda and Donna and members of the Comfort Book Club, like Miranda, I find Persuasion to be my very favorite of Jane Austen's works, mostly because I consider Anne Elliot to be one of the very best characters in literature. In spite of her unhappiness, her regrets, and the behavior of those around her, even Captain Wentworth, she rises above in her own quiet way and proves to be the strongest of them all. That is the quality that draws me in every time I read Persuasion. She always takes the higher road, and that strength of character is something I deeply admire. By the way, this was a great book pick for me personally because my mother and I traveled to both Jane Austen's house and to Bath in late September, and reading Persuasion at the same time made great company. Thank you, Miranda and Donna, and the Comfort Book Club.
Oh, thank you, Heather.
Yes, thank you, Heather. What a wonderful trip that would have been.
Yes. We can't wait to go to Bath in November.
Absolutely, I can't wait.
Yes, and see some of the Jane Austen sites, I'm sure.
Yes.
But yes, I so agree with you about Anne having such strength of character.
She really does, doesn't she? And she's someone that I think she doesn't go through an arc like some of the characters in heroines of Jane Austen's novels. She's just strong throughout, I think.
Yes, I think that's very true. A lot of the heroines in Jane Austen's books do undergo a transformation in terms of their character. They have to learn quite a few lessons about themselves before they get their happy ending. Thinking of Emma, a previous Comfort Book Club choice. But Anne has already learned a lot of life lessons from her mistake in refusing Captain Wentworth. 7 years later, at the start of the novel, she's already understood that was a mistake.
Yes, but she doesn't blame herself, does she?
No, she doesn't.
She still says, well, I did what I thought was right, and so did Lady Russell in her eyes. It wasn't actually a happy thing. She wouldn't recommend it for anybody else, but she doesn't regret in that way the decision she made. She regrets, obviously, that he didn't come back when he had the money and say, oh, hi, Anne, here I am again.
Yes.
Would you reconsider? I've got the money now.
Yes, exactly. But she certainly does look back on the past with regret.
Yes.
Even if she doesn't blame herself.
No, that's right.
She tries very hard not to blame Lady Russell.
She does.
But she does undergo a bit of a physical transformation.
Definitely.
And that's commented on by a lot of the characters. That throughout the novel, she regains some of her lost youth and bloom.
Yes.
So she does transform a bit in that way. But I think, yes, in terms of her character, she's set, really.
Yes,
and
I think
she is
so.
an older heroine, and maybe that's why as well.
I think so too. Yes, I think you're right. She's 27, isn't she, at the start of the novel? So she's gone through those early years. And plus, we learn, unlike Emma, she had the influence of her mother, who was obviously a very sensible, kind, loving mother, and good for Anne. You know, it was a great loss for her when she lost her mother.
Yes, terrible loss. And the only one within her family who truly saw her and valued her.
Yeah.
But also Penny from the US commented on how much she loved Anne too. So let's hear her message.
Hi Miranda and Donna, this is Penny from Colorado in the US. Anne Elliot is a great character with all her attributes and capabilities. She didn't have affection from family and was treated like a Cinderella. Her character and personality, refined through long suffering, is what would sustain her, with or without Captain Wentworth. Anne is perceptive, but she let herself be persuaded by Lady Russell and still was not without the risk of being duped by Mr. Elliot. She knows that a virtue has a flip side. Like Louise's determination becomes carelessness, and although Anne had been persuadable, it was someone wise and trustworthy that influenced her. A worthy soul like Anne's deserves the constancy she is rewarded with. We all get the satisfaction of this happy ending. Thanks for choosing this favorite novel. It is my all-time favorite too.
Oh, thank you,
yes,
Penny.
Thank you, Penny.
Yes, yes, I so agree with what you say about Anne. And also I agree with what Penny said in terms of Anne would have been fine with or without Captain Wentworth.
Absolutely. I think there is that feeling there that
she has that inner strength and inner life.
Absolutely. And she
sustains
has the resources as well, because she says there would always be a home for her with Lady Russell at some point. So she isn't financially dependent on marriage in perhaps the way the Bennet sisters are.
Yes, that's very true.
Yeah.
I read that Margaret Oliphant, that Mrs. Oliphant, the writer, made a comment about the strength of Anne's character and how she would have still managed to live a good life even if she hadn't got Captain Wentworth. The way she described it was that a life without Captain Wentworth for Anne would have been a bit like an overcast day. There would have been a bit of a cloud on her life, but she still would have lived a good life.
Yes, very much.
But how happy we all are that
it
works
for
out
her and everything. And for him.
Yes, exactly. And they have that sunny, happy
I love
ending.
that. I didn't realise that Mrs. Oliphant was obviously a big
fan. A big fan. Which I really enjoyed reading that. But also, of course, with Anne's character, you must also reflect on the title of the book, Persuasion.
Yes.
And that's such a theme throughout the novel,
absolutely.
Of course. A number of times the word comes up.
Yeah.
When people talk about being persuaded or wanting to persuade someone else to do something, it comes up many, many times. And I think there's this real question about the ethics and morality surrounding influencing someone else.
That's true. That's very true.
And Jane Austen was writing from some personal experience on this, in that she started Persuasion just a few months after getting embroiled in a bit of a situation with her niece Fanny Knight, because she'd written to her, praising a young man who Fanny subsequently became engaged to.
Oh, I didn't know this.
Yes.
That was fascinating.
And Jane Austen was sort of horrified because Fanny, she felt, didn't particularly like this young man or didn't love him enough as she should, but had been so influenced, so persuaded by Jane's advice that she'd entered into a very long engagement. And then Jane Austen wrote to her again, essentially saying, you must really consider, I'm not sure your feelings could last as long as the engagement would need to, and you might meet other people essentially, and you must really reconsider. And she was horrified that her own words had persuaded.
Well, and there's the bit in the novel with Mrs. Musgrove and Mrs. Croft saying how they don't like long engagements. They
very
should marry.
clearly speak against long engagements.
They do.
So I found that very interesting.
How fascinating.
That Jane herself had a horror of influencing someone to that extent.
Yes.
And yes, I think you're very much meant to consider Lady Russell's opinion and whether she was right to persuade Anne in the way she did, and whether Anne was right to listen. And opinions on that will maybe be different, obviously, nowadays from the opinion that Anne herself felt at the time in Persuasion.
Yes, I think I agree. And also it makes you wonder, at the end there's the hint that perhaps Mrs. Clay is clever enough and determined enough to persuade
William Elliot.
That's
Mr.
right.
Elliot,
Mr. Elliot, to actually, in the end, make an honest woman of her. And you realise that, there's all different types of levels of persuasion.
Selfish persuasion, conniving persuasion, as well as more altruistic persuasion. That's really true. I love the opening of the book too. I think
such a wonderful opening, isn't it?
It is, and it sets up so many of these themes and plot lines that come up through the course of the novel. Of course, Anne's father, Sir Walter, is instantly presented as a vain, superfluous member of society. Really. I think Jane Austen is really speaking out in this novel against much of the sort of conventions around class and societal structure.
I do too.
She really comes out in support of the professions and professional men who gain, especially the Navy, her own family connections to the Navy. She had two brothers who were in the Navy, so she was maybe predisposed in their favour. But in this book, she really shows that men who rise within the world through their own merit, through intelligence and courage and fortitude, are so much more worthwhile than people like Sir Walter, who has simply inherited his rank and his title and has no true merit.
No, none at all. And also I think she's very much in favour of men of action. So you even have the bit where Captain Benwick is praised, because in the end, what makes Charles Musgrove actually think he will be a good brother-in-law, marrying Louisa, is that he did his best in a rat hunt. And, that was, rather than all the soppy sitting around reading poetry, he showed that he could be a man of action, which is what Admiral Croft said. He said, didn't he, he's actually a very good captain. He did very well in the Navy.
And of course, Nelson himself was the curate's son, and rose and proved himself so much in the Napoleonic Wars. And what was lovely is we heard from another Comfort Book Club reader, Helene, who said that she really noticed the sort of universality of Jane Austen's novels. And I think it's true that so many of the themes in her books we can still appreciate today and are still relevant today. Although the context of her novels, it still definitely placed them in the past. I mean, Persuasion, I think you have to read against the backdrop of the Napoleonic Wars, which was so much a part of Jane Austen's life.
And women's position in those days.
Exactly. But let's hear from Helene and what she felt on reading Persuasion. So this is from Helene in New Caledonia.
Bonjour Miranda, bonjour Donna. I am Helene from Noumea in New Caledonia. Jane Austen was probably the first English novelist I wanted to and was able to read in English because her stories are irresistible and universal, while her style and language are, I find, easy for a foreigner. For someone like me, living on a tropical island in the South Pacific, The world you enter when reading Jane Austen's novels is extremely exotic. Merci beaucoup, Miranda, Donna, for the many pleasant and interesting moments you provide us with. Take care and go on, s'il vous plaît.
Oh, thank you, Helene.
Thank you so much, Helene.
Wonderful to hear from you.
Yes.
And it's lovely to think that the novels have that flavour of exotic to you.
Yes. Just hearing the birds song in the back of that message sounds so exotic to me.
Yes, exactly. It was lovely to hear those birds
Yes.
twittering away in the back of your message. And how wonderful too that Jane Austen was the first English writer that you read in English as well. And I agree, I think she still is actually quite an easy read.
I
She's
agree
one of the
too.
more accessible of the classic authors.
Yes, definitely.
If English isn't your first language, once you get used to her tone and style, her sentences are so succinct.
They are. And you really can move through her prose, I think.
Yes.
It's not too overblown or wordy.
No, exactly. That's very true. We've spoken about how much we love Anne.
Yeah.
But I have to say that Captain Wentworth is one of my very favourite heroes in fiction as well.
Yes.
I think that's so much a part of the strength of the novel. It's that the hero is a really strong character.
Yes.
That's not always the case in Jane Austen.
No, not in Sense and Sensibility. With Edward
Ferrars.
Yes,
and we were saying how much Anne reminded us a bit of Eleanor.
Yes, she
in
does.
Sense and Sensibility, they share sort of common characteristics,
Yeah.
and they both suffer in silence a
Yes.
good deal in
Yes.
both novels.
And both, of course, are a bit older.
Yes, very true. Though Anne's definitely the eldest.
Yeah.
But how much more satisfying is Captain Wentworth
Absolutely.
than Edward Ferrars?
Yes.
I'm glad Jane Austen sorted that out a bit by the end and gave Anne someone a lot better than she gave Eleanor. But Chelle from New York also spoke about how much she loves Captain Wentworth, and she was unsure at first, but he sort of won her over through the course of the book. So let's listen to Chelle's message.
Hi, this is Chelle from Upstate New York. Thank you so much for choosing Persuasion. I thought I'd read it. Turned out I'd only seen the movie, so thank you. I was so impressed with how Captain Wentworth jumped off the page in all of his energy and decisiveness and impatience. In fact, I didn't particularly like him or how he treated Anne until the scene where he went over and picked up the toddler who was climbing all over her and took him and entertained him, and he won my heart. Jane Austen clearly knew her toddlers, and she knew exactly how a romantic hero should deal with that toddler. Thank you again. I love the Comfort Book Club and thoroughly enjoyed reading Persuasion.
Oh, thank you so much, Chelle.
Thank you, Chelle.
Really enjoyed that.
I did. I love the bit
completely
too where he notices how tired she is and gets her the place in with Admiral and Mrs. Croft in their carriage
or whatever
yes,
it is.
Yes,
I know.
Yes.
I really like that scene as well.
Yeah,
He's still considerate towards her.
However cross he is.
Yes, and he's very cross at first.
Yes.
But he is shown as still being a true gentleman.
Yeah.
He's a really interesting hero. He's very different from Mr. Darcy, perhaps Jane's most famous hero in literature.
Yes, very different.
And I think it's interesting to compare the two. I mean, Darcy is very much of the landed
Gentry. Absolutely, yeah.
He is shown as a good example of that in that he is a considerate landlord and he takes care of his estates and the people who work for him, unlike Sir Walter, who is of course forced then to quit Kellynch Hall. Completely.
And of course, I think we see too in the way that Jane Austen in this time shows that this is again a bit like, for the Bennets, the house is left obviously because there was the child was stillborn who was male from the Elliots. So that the girls are not going to be able to stay at that house. And in fact, they leave it early because of his frivolous money matters that he's found.
Mr. Elliot was always going to inherit anyway. And that does echo Pride and Prejudice, where the women of the family would have had to have moved from it. Hence, of course, why Sir Walter and Elizabeth so much wants Mr. Elton to marry Elizabeth.
Yes, Mr. Elliot.
Elliot to marry Elizabeth.
Absolutely.
To keep the estate, the title within the family. And there's very much this idea of how it's beneficial to marry close to your family or even within your family.
Yes.
Against marrying very much outside it and outside of rank, outside of your own society. Jane Austen is very much in favour of more social mobility, a much more open society.
Absolutely. And you wonder if her own experience of having to move home, of losing her own childhood home in that way, made her actually like more willing to give up as she went along, these childhood homes and stuff, and looking to the adventure of living in different places.
Yes, exactly. And of course, marries Captain Wentworth, someone outside of her family circle in the end, and that is seen as such a happy choice and happy marriage. It's interesting to compare the two sort of landed families in the book, the Musgroves against the Elliots.
Yes.
The Musgroves are shown in a much more affectionate, warm light.
They are.
And part of that is because they're still more liberal-minded than Sir Walter. They are happy really with whoever their daughters marry, as long as they think they will be happy marriages. Charles Musgrove too is an interesting character.
Very interesting.
When you compare him to Captain Wentworth.
Yes.
Of course, Anne refuses Charles, and he is shown as really very much inferior, although he is a attractive character, sympathetic.
He's a nice character
in some ways, in many ways. But he is still shown as one of the more sort of idle rich in many ways. He talks about
hunting and sport
hunting and shooting and not much else. And Captain Wentworth is shown as being so infinitely better than that.
Absolutely. Of course, and too, he made his own fortune, whereas Charles is waiting for him, and that's all he's really doing, you feel, in that novel.
Yes,
he's
exactly.
Waiting. Yeah.
Another real sort of theme in the novel, to me, was the societal expectations around gender.
Oh, yeah.
And Jane Austen really plays with that. And of course, there's that impassioned speech at the end of the book in How Men and Women Love. But there's a lot of role reversal that goes on in the book. And Jason from New Zealand spoke about one of his favourite scenes in the novel where Anne Elliot is talking to Captain Benwick about poetry. And she is trying to encourage him to read less sentimental poetry.
More prose.
And I thought how funny it was. Here's a woman advising a young man in this situation. It's a young man who's behaving a lot more like Marianne Dashwood. In Sense and Sensibility. He has too much sensibility. And he's letting himself completely succumb to his emotions in a way that women were portrayed as much more prone to do, and it is Anne who has the real fortitude of character in this scene. But let's hear Jason's message.
Hello, this is Jason from New Zealand. My favourite moment in Persuasion is when Anne Elliot meets Captain James Benwick in Lyme Regis, the coastal town at the western edge of Dorset. Anne learns that Benwick, ever since his fiancée died while he was at sea, deals with sorrow through devotion to the poetry of Lord Byron and Sir Walter Scott, which in turn magnifies, rather than soothes his broken heart. Anne offers Benwick words of comfort with a new prescription for his reading diet. She explains that the misfortune of such all-consuming poetry is that it can only be tasted sparingly, so advises Benwick to include a larger allowance of prose, memoirs, and the finest epistolary novels for his TBR to-be-read pile. That quiet conversation is so delicate and yet impactful, because even as Anne rallies Benwick, she amusingly recognizes a similar melancholy in herself. Lyme Regis is a watershed landscape in the story of Persuasion, for it is there where Anne's mindset grows, from one of backward glances to a lost love, to become one of forward looks to second chances. I would even say that the people, incidents, and the bracing fresh air at the seaside town of Lyme Regis have, if you will forgive the pun, reanimated Anne Elliot. And finally, is Persuasion my favorite Jane Austen novel? Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. Miranda and Donna, thank you both for recommending the hopeful and thoughtful autumnal gorgeousness that is Jane Austen's Persuasion.
Thank you so much, Jason. So glad that Persuasion is a favourite of yours too.
Yes.
And yes, I love that scene with Captain Benwick as well.
Yeah.
But I wanted to consider some more of these role reversals that you see in the book too. I love the fact that Captain Harville, for instance, who is, a real Navy man, a naval officer, but he also is shown to be a very loving husband and father. And there's that cozy domestic scene.
Oh, that is lovely.
Where he makes his home, the interior space, as comfortable and as attractive as he can. Yeah. And he even knits.
Yes.
Which of course Navy men did more at that time. But even so, there's a bit of a role reversal going on there, which is interesting.
True. Yeah.
And the same with the Crofts.
Absolutely.
Mrs. Croft is shown to be more practical in many ways.
I love
than
that
her
she takes
husband.
the reins.
Yes, she's a better driver. And as the lawyer says at the start of the book,
Mr. Shepherd,
that's it. It's Mrs. Croft that impresses him with asking more questions than the Admiral does,
absolutely,
and knowing more of the business side to renting a property.
Oh, that's really true. And I find it very interesting that she and Admiral Croft obviously met very young, barely knew each other. He didn't have money, but at that point they took the leap of faith. They got married, and it was presented as a very happy.
Oh, very happy. And you feel like maybe it foreshadows Anne and Captain Wentworth's relationship in the future a bit as well.
Yes, I think so.
And you feel Mrs. Croft will be a great role model and influence for Anne.
Yes.
It's very much a marriage of equality between her and the Admiral.
Yes.
They're always together.
As
well.
I think with my feeling about Anne is because she had a long time alone. Mrs. Croft says the only time she ever fancies herself ill is when she was separated from him. And I feel with Anne, having had to spend time alone, that she'll perhaps be a little bit stronger. She'll have this very close, equal relationship, but will still be capable of perhaps more so standing on her own 2 feet. I don't know, did you get that feeling?
Yes.
That if he did go away, she could manage?
Yes, I think you're right. But I also think that Anne and Captain Wentworth's marriage will very much be a marriage of equals as well. And I think maybe Mrs. Croft will be a great example to her in travelling more.
Yes, I think so too.
Anne says how much she wants to experience new places.
Yeah.
Mrs. Croft talks about going on board a ship with her husband.
And going all over the world, really.
Going all over the world.
Although never to the West Indies.
Yes. But Anne speaks a very poignant line towards the end of the novel about women living at home, quiet, confined, and their feelings preying on them. And I think what Jane Austen very deliberately shows in this book is a woman who does not stay at home, quiet and confined.
Favourite characters, yes.
Mrs. Croft sets out and travels. She sees a lot of the world. In that way, she is shown as being equal to a man.
She is.
And this is a novel very much about equality between men and women, I feel.
Yes.
But I wanted to talk a bit about the famous ending of the book. There was an original different ending.
Absolutely, yes.
Without the letter.
Yeah, how terrible
I know,
was that?
That would have been so awful to have missed that. But in the original ending, it was in fact Admiral and Mrs. Croft that played the pivotal part in bringing Anne and Wentworth together. And I think it shows that they will be a very important friendship, relationship within Anne's life. But thank goodness we got the better ending.
Yes,
Jane Austen wasn't satisfied. She rewrote it, and we got the letter, and we got that amazing final scene. And one of our Comfort Book Club members, Cristina in Spain, sent us a message about how much she loved the ending and the letter in particular. So let's listen to Christina's message.
Good afternoon, Miranda, Donna, and all the members of the Comfort Book Club. I began to read Persuasion with what we could say a lack of faith, due to I had recently decided that Emma was my favorite Jane Austen's novels. However, against all odds, Persuasion has been promoted to the first position. Such a wonderful story, and what a letter! Oh my God, I have read it more than 10 times. The letter could have been a romantic one, a touching one, but it is much more than that. It is a masterpiece because it contains love, passion, deep sadness, hope, joy, all that at the same time, and without grandiose adjectives or phrases, because it is surprisingly simple. Thank you very much, Miranda and Donna, for this wonderful recommendation.
Oh, thank you, Cristina.
Yes, thank you, Cristina.
Always so enjoy your messages, and I absolutely love that letter as well.
So special.
It is one of the best love letters in literature, I think.
Yeah.
Another Comfort Book Club member sent in a message about this scene, but she concentrated on not the letter, but on Anne's conversation with Captain Harville. And that is such an interesting conversation. And this was Gina from the USA. And she spoke about how that conversation between Anne and Captain Harville really resonated for her even today. So let's listen to Gina's message.
Good afternoon, Miranda, Donna, and Comfort Book Club aficionados. This is Gina. I'm calling from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in the States. I wanted to say that I really enjoyed Persuasion, and I must admit that in the past I have struggled with Jane Austen, but something about this book really clicked for me. And I deeply felt Anne's proclamations in the penultimate chapter when she says that women do not forget love as quickly as men do. And especially in that time, Anne points out that women live at home, quiet and confined, while men had a profession, pursuits, and business outside of the house. And certainly today, many women have professions, pursuits, and business beyond the home. But there still seems to be some truth in the sentimentality of women. We are permitted it, while men really are not. And I'm not sure if it's science or society or a mix of both, but really and truly, men are encouraged and allowed to move on from relationships more quickly than women. And I do think that this is such an interesting observation from Jane Austen in this time period. And I think it points out that this is the reason that the classics are classics. These are timeless issues. So thank you very much, Miranda, for suggesting this book. I probably wouldn't have tackled another Jane Austen book, but I'm so glad that I did. I think you've made an Austen convert out of me. Have a great day.
Oh, thank you, Gina.
Thank you, Gina.
I'm so glad to make anyone an Austen convert. That makes me very happy. And I really loved the points that you made about the book. I think Jane Austen herself was very frustrated by the gender stereotype of sentimentality in women. And she really fought against the idea that women were only sentimental creatures in her books. Mrs. Croft has the line, she's annoyed with Captain Wentworth when he says he won't allow women on his ship because, you know, it's not as it should be for them. And she says, how dare you essentially treat women like we are not rational creatures. Anne, although very empathetic, very gentle, is shown to have true strength of character.
She does, and she has a wit that's sort of ironic too. She gets things.
Exactly.
And,
but in the moment of crisis in Lyme, when Louisa falls to the ground, it's Anne that's the strong one.
Absolutely.
Mary and Henrietta behave the way that women in novels were kind of portrayed to behave. In
hysterics and fainting.
Hysterics and fainting, exactly. But Anne doesn't. She remains very level-headed.
She's better than the men, in fact.
She's better than the men.
Wentworth included,
who
flaps a bit.
Exactly. She doesn't panic. She remains cool-headed and calm in a crisis. And I think that's really important. But I also think that in that wonderful speech of Anne's, when Captain Harville says that, of course, it's always been men who have written about women and written about them in this way, and that they're inconstant and so on. Anne says how, the pen has always been in men's hands, and it's significant that Captain Wentworth drops his pen.
Absolutely.
As he's listening to them and as he's writing his letter. Persuasion is wonderful because a woman is writing it. The pen is in her hand. And I think she gets to show both that men and women love each other very much in the same way. They are both equally passionate. I think this is a very passionate novel. That women are not just sentimental, hysterical creatures. They are rational, practical human beings. But that their lives are certainly more confined often, writing from this time. Jane Austen really shows that. And there's a real domestic side to this novel. You see very many different domestic interiors.
You do. And I love that, actually.
Me too, I do. There's that sterile, cold sort of home life that you feel of the Elliots in Bath. All sort of shallow grandeur.
Absolutely.
I love the bit where Admiral Croft says he has to remove so many mirrors from Kellett Hall from his daughter's room. You can't escape yourself, he says. Puts away so many of the mirrors. In the Musgroves, you get much more of a cozy, familial, happy home. Which I love. But I think it's very significant that unlike any of her other heroines, you don't know with Anne, Jane Austen doesn't describe her home at the end of the book. She's not in a Pemberley, she's not in a Donwell Abbey, she's not even settled in a little vicarage. There's not that description of the home.
There isn't.
In fact, it's a type of carriage that Anne has that's described at the end. Something that Captain Wentworth has given her.
And that Mary envies
Exactly.
terribly.
And that's all about freedom.
And travel,
Wentworth
isn't it?
gives
Movement.
her freedom, travel, movement, seeing more of the world. And I think that's what makes this a wonderful match, is that enables Anne to have more freedom and experiences of the world.
Absolutely.
Through their union.
I think, when I was young and I first read this, I didn't realise that, actually. That passed me by. As I got older and travelled myself and had many different homes, I realised, these are mind-opening experiences that we, as women now, we have.
Yes, exactly. And Anne didn't have that freedom, but through marriage, a good marriage, she was able to get that. But I think that's an interesting point you kind of touched on there too, in terms of rereading Persuasion as you grow older.
Many times.
You notice so many more
You
things.
read it very differently, don't you think?
Yes, I think you do. And I think you read it differently as an older reader. I also think it's a more mature novel, and I think a more mature novelist only could have written it.
I agree.
But one of our Comfort Book Club readers, Nancy from Long Island in New York, sent in a message about how she came to read Persuasion a little bit older, about 40 years old, and how she thought that was a sort of perfect time in her life to read the novel. So let's hear Nancy's message.
Hello, Miranda, Donna, and all the members of the Comfort Book Club. This is Nancy from Long Island, New York. I was overjoyed that we were reading Persuasion this month. I dedicated this reread to the memory of my mom. This was our favorite Austen. We felt such an affinity to the character of Anne Elliot, and of course, were more than a bit in love with Captain Wentworth. I first read Persuasion when I was about 40 years old, and in retrospect, I feel this was the perfect time for me to do so, as I had experienced just enough life and love to fully appreciate this novel, Austen's genius, and the miracle of second chances. I look forward to reading and listening to everyone's insights about this novel and wish you all a wonderful weekend. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy.
Yes, thank you, Nancy.
For your message, and how lovely that this reread was dedicated to your mother's memory. That's very touching.
Yes.
And yes, I think it does have that, not only an autumnal mood to the story, but also this more mature, philosophical, it's a very wise book.
It
that
is
seems
a very
to kind
wise
of
book.
Come with age, I suppose.
Yes, experience and age,
yes,
and
exactly.
seeing the world a bit. I think you could say that of Jane Austen too.
Yes, exactly. And she travelled to Lyme herself and loved it there. So yes. Of course, this novel is mainly centred around Anne and Captain Wentworth, and love and matrimony. But something we were talking about to do with Persuasion was how much friendship is important in the book as well. Different types of friendship, bad friends and good friends, and whether you can trust someone or not. And Anne very much is envious of what she thinks is a missed opportunity of being friends with the Harvilles, with people like Captain Benwick, who she says to herself, oh, these might have been my friends if I'd married Captain Wentworth. And you feel her longing for real friendship and good friendship.
She's so envious of the friendship between the two sisters, the Musgrove sisters, you know, unlike her own sisters who are not friendly to her at all.
Not at all. And that's really poignant.
Yes.
And then there are people who she perhaps will get friendly with, like Mr. Elliot, but who she's also a bit cautious of,
she's
wary
very cautious.
of, because she thinks he's too polished, too well-mannered, too universally liked, and too universally agreeable to everyone around him. So she distrusts his sincerity, and she is very right to do that. But people read people wrongly quite a bit in the book. Like Elizabeth is friends with Mrs. Clay and is totally blind to Mrs. Clay's true motives.
Yes.
Lady Russell is blind to Mr. Elliot's true motives as well. But one of the nicest things about Anne is how unlike her family she is, how little of a snob she is. And one of the most important friendships in the book is her friendship with Mrs. Smith.
I think that this time that really stood out for me. That relationship, the friendship between them, and indeed Mrs. Smith's character. What she calls her elasticity of mind, which I again, like, you know, she's quite different from Anne, but again, she's a widow, but she's right now she's a woman on her own, just like Anne is, and she has perhaps no money, she's poor, but the way she uses her character and her strengths is very interesting, isn't it? Especially when you think of poor Jane Austen herself becoming ill and being confined to a sick room.
Yes, exactly. It's so interesting to think how much of this novel has some elements of biography, autobiography, I should say, to it. Virginia Woolf, for instance, believed it was very autobiographical, and that Jane Austen had herself lost, a love in her past. Her family always said that she fell in love with a curate who died. I don't know how true all of this is, and you can't know because so much was destroyed. But I certainly feel what Virginia Woolf says is right, that Jane Austen couldn't have written this novel until later in life, and she said that she essentially had to be able to have time pass and to process things before writing.
How interesting.
Which I thought was very interesting. But also, like you said, she herself was becoming poorer by the time she was writing this. Ill health, those symptoms of her final fatal illness were starting to rear themselves too. And there is quite a lot about accident and injury and the possibility of death.
Such a great, I thought, I'd never seen it, that in fact the Musgroves are full of like these rather horrible accidents happening, isn't it?
Yes. Well, yes, young Charles Musgrove, the son, has the fall from the tree.
Yes, which could have been fatal, of course. He's an heir.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Yes.
And then Louisa's famous fall, of course. So it's like death hovers on the sort of edges. Of this novel quite a bit.
Yes.
And you do wonder if Jane was feeling her own mortality.
I wondered, and perhaps this is fanciful, but if she even worried about Cassandra being left, and shows perhaps in someone like Mrs. Smith, who can go forward, even though she gets more money and she actually regains some of her health. It's lovely to see that she's not. When Anne and Captain Wentworth marry, she becomes a friend of both of theirs. They help her. She's not excluded.
No, not at all.
I
she really. I think it says
touching.
Somewhere that she gains two friends through their marriage, and that you feel is very true. They are a good friend to her. But yes, whatever Jane Austen's own situation, feelings, lost loves, we don't really know much about that. But she certainly would have had an example in her sister Cassandra, whose fiance died before Cassandra could marry him. And so Jane Austen knew about loss and the loss of love as well. And Persuasion has been described in some ways as almost like a ghost story, in that these ghosts of former love from the past come back miraculously in a way in this novel, almost as if you could recall someone who has died or a lost love, to have them back in your life. That's what happens in the book.
And it's a positive way. When Lady Russell tries to tempt her to marry Mr. Elliot by saying, but you could just be like your mother, and she presents this, and I think for a second Anne is tempted because it's like her mother. She is a ghost of her mother, and she could fill that place. But then she realizes, oh no.
Exactly. But another Comfort Book Club listener spoke about the importance of friendship in the novel. So let's hear from Victoria in California.
Hi, Donna and Miranda. It's a pleasure to be back at the Comfort Book Club. This is Victoria in California. I read Persuasion decades ago, and this time around I decided to listen to the audiobook. I listened to the one read by Greta Sachi. She's really a gifted narrator who's able to voice all the characters so well. Of course, Anne's relationship with Captain Wentworth is the primary focus of the book, and I was impressed by Austen's ability to capture the anguish of conflicting emotions experienced by Anne and Captain Wentworth as they circled each other in the octagon room. But I was newly struck by the emphasis on friendship. There's Anne's relationship with Captain Berwick, founded on their mutual love of books, which I could certainly identify with. But even more important is Anne's friendship with Mrs. Smith, who is cruelly discounted by Sir Walter, but deeply loved by Anne. Since Sir Walter is such an insensitive father, it's good to see both Captain Harville and Admiral Cross providing her with moral support. Austen isn't always totally accepting of all her characters. She's certainly eager to depict Sir Walter as a person who is swayed by wealth and appearances, and Mary and the Musgrove sisters are undeniably silly. But who could ask for a more satisfying villain than the manipulative Mr. Elliot? All in all, I loved the book and have gone on to read it now in a printed form because I'm sure there are things I missed. So I'm a permanent member of the Comfort Book Club, and thank you so much for hosting.
Oh, thank you, Victoria.
Yes, thank you,
so
Victoria.
Enjoyed hearing all of your thoughts. And yes, I think friendship is a really important theme, and what you brought out with that too is it's friendship between men and women as well as friendships within their own
single-sex friendships.
Yeah,
yes,
exactly.
yes.
Which I find very interesting
It is,
too.
it
It's a very positive portrayal of more equal relationships between men and women generally, both in terms of romantic ones and platonic ones.
That's so true.
But yes, also what we were sort of discussing, how much of this is sort of autobiographical, how much of Jane's life comes into it. Certainly her relationship with her brothers, I think, and everything that they told her about naval life really comes into it too. And I think that really helped to make the male characters sing a lot more in this book. There was more depth to Captain Harville, Captain Benwick, Admiral Croft, as well as Captain Wentworth. I think all of those characters had a real sort of flavour and energy all to themselves.
Absolutely, and that description of Admiral Croft, like looking with horror at the painting of the ship.
Yes,
I
really
couldn't help but think she must have heard some Navy man going on about something, because it felt so real, didn't it?
It really did,
yeah.
But another Comfort Book Club member, Susan in Florida, also spoke about how the novel set her wondering about Jane Austen's life a little bit and how much that came into it. So let's hear Susan's message now.
Hello, this is Susan from New York, living in Florida. Thank you both for choosing Persuasion by Jane Austen for this month. I was hesitant to start it. I feared it may hit close to home for me, but isn't that the beauty of Jane's writings, that they do hit close to home for all of us in some way? I found myself impatient with Mary's complaining right off the bat, and rooting for the two main characters, even though their love story took a long time to come to fruition. And Captain Wentworth was quite reticent in his emotions, which I kind of wanted him to just come out with it. I loved Captain Harville. I thought he was almost slightly playing matchmaker towards the end there, but I could be wrong. And I have to say that Mr. Elliot had me fooled. In the beginning, I thought he was a good guy, and I rooted for him, embarrassingly enough, but not for long. In any event, I loved the book. I look forward to the next one. I grieve for the author. I feel like she wrote the ending she would have liked for her and Mr. James Lefroy, but didn't get a chance to experience. And I'm just grateful to her for her generosity of heart and the way she poured it out onto pages for the rest of us to read. Thank you, Miranda and Donna. Bye for now.
Oh, thank you, Susan.
Yes, thank you, Susan.
Enjoyed all of your thoughts.
Yes.
And yes, I think it'd be easy to root for Mr. Elliot in some ways at the beginning.
Yes,
because you don't know.
Because he's
really,
the first who really notices that she's getting her bloom back.
Yes, and he has the good taste to appreciate Anne, which as the reader, you think that obviously stands a lot in his favour. Yeah. So it can come as a bit of a shock. And yes, I think reading Persuasion would make anyone wonder about the author a little bit and what she had gone through in order to write this book. But why it's such a comfort read for me, and I think for you too, is because there's such a spirit of hope in the book.
Absolutely. There's a bittersweetness to it, I find. And, you know, identify with the way Anne is really quite an introverted, but really gentle character in so many ways, and yet there's a strength in her. And I I love this book.
Yes, and I do think that it has a very hopeful quality to it. And for our final message today, I wanted to share Antoinette from Canada's thoughts. She also mentioned what a hopeful book Persuasion is. So let me play Antoinette's message.
Hello, Miranda and Donna. My name is Antoinette, and I'm from Toronto, Canada. I find that with every reading of Persuasion, there is always something new that I discover. It may not have the same amount of sparkling wit that you'd get in Pride and Prejudice or Emma. However, I feel maybe because Jane Austen was writing it near the end of her life, it's filled with a lot more poignancy. It's filled with hope that one can have that happy ending for themselves, and that love in a figurative and literal sense can cross oceans. Captain Wentworth does show us all that men need not lose their affection and cannot be fickle and keep it, and so does she. I feel in our ever-changing world, it's something that is really admirable and truly romantic. Maybe that's why it's my favorite of her novels.
Oh, thank you, Antoinette.
Yes, thank you, Antoinette.
Yes, I think this is a truly romantic book, as you say, and definitely one of my favourites. Yeah. But thank you so much again to everyone who contributed wonderful voice messages. Yes, I hope people enjoyed listening to this discussion of Persuasion. I know I have.
Oh, me too.
So it could go on and on and on, but yes, thank you for watching, and do leave all of your thoughts about the novel in the comments section beneath this video. I'd love to hear your thoughts as well. And don't forget that next month's comfort book choice is Wintering by Catherine May. So I've got it here. Yeah. Wintering by Catherine May is November's read. A non-fiction book this time that I'm really looking forward to. Yeah. But yes, thank you so much again for watching. Extra big thanks to all of you who have pressed the super thanks button lately on my videos. You're so appreciated. But thank you to everyone who comments and likes and watches my videos. And I hope you all have a wonderful weekend ahead. Goodbye.
Goodbye.